Okay, so good morning, everybody. We're about to have class 5 in the book Touching a City's Soul. So if you have that book, you can want to take it out. We're on page 21. So that's where we're up to. And it's a new sikha. We finished like sort of a section last time, and we're up to a new sikha, which is going to be a new group of people. So, all those names and everybody who you had to remember from all those different cities, there's this new group of people now. It's not a continuation. So it's Sikha 3 on page 21. So this is going to be talking about Chassidus again, like about the sort of some fundamental ideas in Chassidus that the previous Rebbe is explaining to the people in Chicago. And you're going to see that some of the questions that maybe people were asking last class about the way that the Heel Davener, if you remember at the end, the Heel Davener, how he was called that, like not so nicely by that particular person, and then it was explained on a deeper level, more mystical level. So there's going to be more of these ideas, of the basic ideas of Chassidus. So, okay, so we're starting. When the Alter Rebbe was in Mizrich, now the Alter Rebbe is the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. He was the student of the Maggid of Mizrich, who was the student of the Baal Shem Tov. And he was called the Maggid of Mizrich. He lived in Mizrich. And when the Alter Rebbe was a young man, he was deciding whether he was going to go continue his studies in Mizrich or in Vilna. That's how he describes his decision. And he said that in Vilna, they taught one how to learn, and in Mizrich, they taught one how to daven. That's how he described the difference. And he said, learning, I knew how to do a little bit, but davening is what he felt he didn't know how to do. Now, he wanted to go to Mizrich to learn how to daven properly. Now, of course, when Alter Rebbe says learning and davening, and they taught those things, and he didn't know how to daven, it doesn't mean in a sort of a simple way that we would say it about ourselves. But yes, the whole spiritual work of davening, of connecting to Hashem, that kind of avodah, was taught in Mizrich. That was the teachings of Chassidus, and that's what he wanted to hear. So he went there. So when he was talking about the time that he was in Mizrich, he heard not only the teachings that the Maggid delivered in public or shared with his disciples, the members of the Holy Brotherhood, but also teachings that the Maggid transmitted to him personally at fixed times. Most of those were teachings that he had heard from the Baal Shem Tov. We know that the Alter Rebbe became extremely close to the Maggid, and he gave over teachings to him privately, and he also gave over prophecies to him privately about his future and about different things that were going to happen, and sort of entrusted him with carrying on the teachings of Chassidus. The erudite Chassid, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac of Vitebsk, gave my grandfather, so this is the previous Rebbe speaking, so his grandfather is the Rebbe Maharash, a detailed description of the major disputation that took place in Minsk in 1783 between the Alter Rebbe and the towering Talmudic scholars of Vilna, Shklov, Brisk, Minsk, and Slutsk. So this is a famous disputation where there was a discussion between the Alter Rebbe and some of the leading scholars of that time, where they were confronting him on the teachings of Chassidus, basically. So this Chassid, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac of Vitebsk, gave her like a description of what happened there, and we're going to hear some of that description now in this section. And because in that disputation, the Alter Rebbe gave over fundamental teachings of Chassidus, that's what this is sort of leading us to. The two most fundamental objections of his opponents to the approach of the Baal Shem Tov and his disciples are outlined here. In other words, this is the objection that these scholars of these cities had against Chassidus, and they confronted the Alter Rebbe, and we're going to see how they confronted and how he answered. Firstly, the approach, these are the two problems they had. Firstly, the approach of the Baal Shem Tov obligates even unlettered folk to give careful attention to their davening and to their reading of Tehillim, even though they do not know what their words mean. Hence, the Alter Rebbe's opponents argued with passion. This attitude no doubt elevates the self-esteem of those ignoramuses and cheapens, these are their words, right? And cheapens the respect that is due to Torah scholars. And everyone knows that dire punishments are brought down to the world only because of ignoramuses. This is their first argument. Like, why are you building up simple folk and telling them that they're davening and they're reading it to Tehillim is important? Really, the main people are the Torah scholars. Secondly, they said, the Baal Shem Tov school of thought teaches that even a Gaon and a Tzaddik must do tshuva. Even great people, great tzaddikim have to do tshuva, the Baal Shem Tov says. Surely, they protested, this attitude undermines the honor of the Torah and its prominent scholars. After all, they argued, both the written Torah and the oral Torah teach throughout the Torah that Torah sages are the foundation of the world. They increase peace in the world and they are its true builders, whereas the Baal Shem Tov's teachings would have them regarded as the kind of people who have to do teshuvah. So I think for anybody who has learned Hasidus, it sounds shocking to hear these two objections. It just sounds so, it just doesn't sit well, right? But these were the actual objections that the Torah scholars had at that time. I think we can understand possibly a little bit why Baal Shem Tov felt it was so necessary to disseminate his teachings after we see these objections. But these were the objections that they had at that time. So Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac of Vitebsk related further that the disputation in Minsk was conducted in 2 sessions. The first was an examination in Lamdos, Talmudic scholarship, with Hasidim. Because the Misnagdim stipulated that they would not conduct any disputation with Hasidim until they were assured that their leader was a lamdan and an outstanding scholar. So he sort of had to pass a test of learning before they would even have this conversation with him. Only thereafter would they state their complaints in the second session. The Alter Rebbe agreed to be examined by the Gaonim, provided only that the Hasidim would have the reciprocal right, and to this the Misnagdim agreed. So they agreed like the first day was going to be what you call in Yiddish, I guess, a faher. They were going to test him in his knowledge so that they would know if they respected his learning, then they could hear what he had to say. If they didn't respect his learning, they weren't interested in what he had to say. And he agreed to that. So now the previous Rebbe puts in a parenthetical statement. This is the relation of the story from Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac. But now the Rebbe puts into parentheses, the previous Rebbe puts into parentheses, by the way, an additional source gives a detailed account of the discussion of the first session. There, the Alter Rebbe provided answers to all the questions he was asked, whereas a significant number of his questions remained unanswered. Okay, back to Rebbe Yitzchak Isaac's narrative. Both in his answers and in his questions, the Alter Rebbe's words were clear, concise, and distinct. This style of speech, notwithstanding the profundity of the subjects being analyzed, made a favorable impression on all of his listeners, from the most outstanding scholars to the ordinary Gemara learners. So the Alter Rebbe was known for being very succinct in his teachings. In fact, he would say whole Maimarim, whole Hasidic discourses that consisted of 1 or 2 sentences. This was at a certain stage in his life. Then he was actually imprisoned by the Tsar, and when he came out of that imprisonment, says he started to elaborate on his teachings of Hasidus, and it became much more explained and elaborated on them longer. Those 2 styles were called before Petersburg and after Petersburg. Petersburg was the city where he was incarcerated, but he was known for his very succinct ability to very succinctly summarize very deep concepts in just a few words. So I guess that the fact that he was able to do that in his Gemara learning as well made an impression on the people who were listening, because we all know to be able to encapsulate deep ideas very clearly and simply is a great gift. 3 of the most esteemed scholars then asked the Alter Rebbe to answer the unanswered questions that he had posed, meaning he posed questions to the Misnagdim They were not able to answer them, so they asked him, you answer your own questions. Those three scholars, or three of those scholars, asked him to do that. Those three scholars were the Hor Rosh Yeshiva of Aaron Yaakov of Slutsk, Reb Zemela Stutzker, which if you look in the footnote, it says that was the uncle of Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac, the person who's telling the story, like his own uncle was there. And the eldest Rosh Yeshiva of the Yeshivas Haravid, the renowned Rabbi Nachum Shlomo. The Alter Rebbe obliged, leaving just two problematic queries unresolved. As to the two fundamental objections to the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov that were mentioned above, the Alter Rebbe answered, the underlying principle of the approach of the Baal Shem Tov and of the teachings of the Rebbe, the Maggid of Mezrich, the principle that illumines the path of the Maggid's disciples in their Avodah, is based on the first divine revelation to Moshe Rabbeinu. The following teaching on that subject was relayed to me by the Rebbe, the Maggid of Mezrich, who heard it from the Baal Shem Tov. So the Alter Rebbe is basically saying, and about to say, and now comes that teaching, we're going to learn that teaching that he taught, that the fundamental principles of the teachings of Chassidus, there's two fundamental principles that are learned from the story in Chumash, where Moshe Rabbeinu is given his first prophecy. That, in other words, this is the first direct conversation that God has with Moshe Rabbeinu, who becomes the redeemer of the Jewish people from Egypt. And that whole story is the basis of these two fundamental concepts in Chassidus, as taught by the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, and then the Alter Rebbe, and become the underlying principles of Chassidus. So I thought that it might be appropriate for us to just pull up those psukim and Rashis and read through that story for a few minutes before we go back into the teaching, because in order to understand the teaching, it's going to be much easier if we see the Chumash. So if you give me a minute, okay, so just the background of the story is that Moshe Rabbeinu has run away from Egypt, and he goes to Midian, and there he is married. He marries Zipporah, and he is shepherding his father-in-law Yisro's sheep. So this is what happens. And the Jews right now are in Egypt, and the slavery is getting worse and worse. So it says, Moshe was pasturing the flocks of Yisro, his father-in-law, the chief of Midian, and he led the flocks after the free pasture land, and he came to the mountain of God, to Chayrev. He went further away, and Rashi explains why did he go a little bit further? To distance himself from the possibility of theft, so that the flocks would not pasture in other people's fields. And why he came to the mountain of God, to Chayrev, why is it called the mountain of God? Because of the events of the future. This is what we later on in Chumash call Har Sinai. This is where the Torah is being given to the Jewish people later on. So he's going through the wilderness, and he stops at this mountain because this is what he sees. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from within the thorn bush, and behold, the thorn bush was burning with fire, but the thorn bush was not being consumed. Right? This was like a miracle, because usually there could be fires going on in the desert, like things could catch fire from the heat or whatever it is, but then they become consumed, right? This bush is burning in the fire, but it's not being consumed. So that was a remarkable sight, and Moshe sees it. So Rashi, again, the main commentator of the Chumash, says the term in Hebrew, let me see if I can get this here. The term in Hebrew, labas eish, here where I'm highlighting, is translated here as the flame of fire, but it's an unusual expression in Hebrew. So Rashi says, Hebrew, labas eish, what does that mean? It means the flame of the fire, the heart of the fire, because the word labas shares a root with the word lave, which means heart. So we would literally translate it as the heart of the fire. And what that means is that it's the main part of the fire. Like the heart is the main part, it's in the center of the body, and it's the main organ. So he sees that in that flame of fire, and the bush is burning, but it's not being consumed. from within the thorn bush, but not from any other tree, because I am with him in distress. So again, the pasuk is emphasizing it was a sneh, it was a thorn bush, and it wasn't a lush bush. It wasn't a bush that was giving any kind of fruit or anything like that. It was a low to the ground thorn bush. And Rashi's asking, why is Hashem choosing to appear to Moshe Rabbeinu for the first prophecy he's giving Moshe Rabbeinu, telling him to go redeem the Jewish people? Why is God choosing to appear in a thorn bush? It's not very impressive. Maybe a tall cedar or a lush fruit tree or something like that. Why is he appearing in a thorn bush? Because Hashem is trying to give Moshe the message that Imi Anaycha B'tzar is a famous pasuk from Tehillim. I'm with him in distress, meaning Hashem is with us when we are in a difficult situation, a lowly thorn bush with thorns, prickly, not producing anything. Hashem is with us. It's not being consumed, and in Uchal, it's not being consumed. It's just saying the grammar of that word. So then Moshe says, let me turn now and see this great spectacle. Why does the thorn bush not burn up? So Rashi says, what if he turns, he's not going to see anything, right? He's going to turn away from it. So Rashi explains what does he mean he's turning? Let me turn away from here to draw near to there, meaning I need to move a little bit from where I'm standing right now, and I need to come closer to the thorn bush to understand why is this fire burning in the bush and the bush is not being consumed. This idea that he's turning away to come closer is going to figure prominently in the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. And then, okay, these are basically the verses that he's going to be explaining, but just so that you know the next point, that the Lord saw he had turned to see, and God called to him from within the thorn bush and said, Moshe, Moshe, and he said, here I am. And God said to him, do not draw near to here, take off your shoes, because the place that you stand on is holy soil. And that is where we learn, by the way, that we take off our shoes, like in the Beis HaMikdash, the Kohanim served barefoot. In a holy place, we take off our shoes. And then comes the prophecy where God says to Moshe that he should go and redeem the Jewish people. So this is the story that it's talking about. This is the vision of God appearing in the thorn bush to Moshe is going to be the vision that the Baal Shem Tov is going to be explaining to us on a sort of mystical level or on a service of Hashem level as the foundational points of Chassidus, and what it means for us, because Moshe Rabbeinu, this is his first conversation that God gives him, and it's meant for all of us. This message in the Chumash is meant for all of us. We have a general principle that every story in Chumash applies to every Jew for all times, and also, as we are going to learn, the Baal Shem Tov teaches that because of the exact wording in the pasuk, it indicates that it's for everybody as well, not just for Moshe. And he's going to analyze the exact wording in the pasuk. Now, another bit of, okay, are there any questions about that? Okay, another bit of information that I think would be helpful to give as background before we go into the teaching is that, and I think we may have mentioned this before, that Rashi is the main commentary. We just did a little bit of Rashi, but there's also what's called Targum Onkelos. I don't remember which class we spoke about that in, but we spoke about it in one class. That Onkelos translates the Torah into Aramaic, but the translation is also an explanation, because obviously every time you translate a word from one language to another, there's not exactly the same word in the other language. So the words that you choose to translate also interpret the original word. So even though it's called a translation, it's also an explanation. We're going to see how the words that Onkelos uses to translate some of the words in our pasuk here are very specific, and they teach us very profound lessons. Which, by the way, there's a halacha. Why the halacha is that if somebody was served on the high court in Jerusalem, in the Temple Mount, there was a high court of 71 judges. If somebody served in that court, they had to be fluent in all the languages of the world, because it wasn't seen to be accurate enough for somebody to give testimony and an interpreter having to translate it. They had to be able to understand any testimony that was said in the original language that it was being spoken so that they would get the full understanding of that testimony. Just a little Jewish trivia there. Okay, so we're on the top of page 23, and no questions? Okay, okay. So now the Alter Rebbe is going to be explaining this to the people as an answer to their two questions, those two objections that they have to Hasidus. And it's the words of Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac explaining what the Alter Rebbe said at that time in that disputation. Concerning the revelation of Moshe Rabbeinu, it is written, an angel of God appeared to him in a blazing fire from within a bush. Well, those are the psukim we just read. He looked and he saw that the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not being consumed. Moshe said, let me now turn aside and look at this remarkable sight. Right? Those are the psukim we just learned. Now, the first verb in the quotation, avayera, means appeared, or more literally was seen, meaning an angel of God appeared to him in a blazing fire, right? That's what we're talking about. So the literal translation could be appeared, or more literally was seen. Yet, it is translated in the Aramaic Targum as v'iskali, which means was revealed. He does not translate it as the angel of God was seen. He translated it as the angel of God was revealed. So what does that mean? Revelation implies that something is made accessible to every individual according to his level, including even people of modest spiritual attainment. Right? The concept of revelation means that the purpose is that something be revealed. If something has to be revealed, it means that something that's generally concealed is being revealed. There's like some sort of effort and intention of understanding and connection with that revelation. So now it's going to go on to sort of prove that with other times when this term is used in Chumash. That explains likewise why in the verse that it says God descended upon Mount Sinai, this is at the giving of the Torah, the Hebrew word is Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, which usually could be translated as God descended, but the Targum uses the same verb v'iskali, which means he was revealed, meaning that the Targum Onkelos translates the pasuk that looks like it's saying Hashem descended on Mount Sinai. He translates it as Hashem revealed himself on Har Sinai, which is the same mountain that we're talking about now. Whereas the expected translation of descended would be unachas, as in the verb that tells us that Yehuda descended. It uses the verb nachas. The Targum uses the word nachas. In other words, the same word in Hebrew, vayered, is translated by the Targum as unachas when we're talking about literally somebody going down. Whereas here, when we're talking about Hashem going down onto the mountain, the Onkelos translates it as Hashem revealed himself. And when we talk about the angel here being seen, he also translated as revealed himself. So too, the Targum uses a verb of the same root, vayechos, in the verb that says the border of the Holy Land should go down as far as a certain place. Meaning, again, when it uses the word going down, in other places, Onkelos does translate it as, in Aramaic, going down. In contrast, in a verse preceding the destruction of Sodom, the phrase ve'eradna literally means I will go down, meaning God is saying also he's going to go down to destroy Sodom and Amorah. The Targum Onkelos translated as ve'iskali kan, I will now reveal myself, meaning Hashem is revealing himself to destroy Sodom and Amorah. He's not actually going down. Using the same verb as appears with regard to the giving of the Torah, the verb that speaks of revelation. So basically what the Alter Rebbe is explaining here, in the summary that Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac is giving, is that the verb that's used here to say that that the angel appeared, and later on it's going to be God speaking, right? That there was an appearance in this bush, he translates as revelation, and the same time or the same way that he translates revelation to say when God revealed himself on Har Sinai at the giving of the Torah, and when God revealed himself when he was going to destroy Sodom and Amorah. And now God is revealing himself in this burning thorn bush. All of those verbs, even though they're different verbs in Hebrew, Onkelos says all mean revelation. In one case, it does not mean just appeared or was seen, and in the other case, it does not just mean went down. This, by the way, I mean, just to sidetrack for a minute, we don't say that literally that God went down onto Har Sinai, because there's no place devoid of God, right? God is everywhere, so he doesn't have to go down onto the mountain. He doesn't have to go down to destroy Sodom and Amorah. He isn't up that he has to come down. He's everywhere. So that's the reason why Onkelos doesn't translate it as going down literally. But it means a revelation, above to below, a revelation. So we're saying that here with Moshe's prophecy, it's also a revelation. So now the Alter Rebbe is going to define, what does revelation mean? Revelation, as we have seen, implies that that which is being shown can be perceived even by those of a very lowly spiritual stature. Meaning, revelation, again, is the idea that something that's not usually available becomes available. It's revealed. That means it's revealed. People can understand it or see it or experience it. This was the case at the giving of the Torah, which was received by everyone from the stature of Moshe Rabbeinu down to the lowliest of the Jewish people, right? At the giving of the Torah, it says Hashem revealed himself to everybody. Every single Jewish person who was alive then, and every single soul that was going to be born in all future generations was there at the giving of the Torah, and God revealed himself, and we experienced it. All of us. We didn't have to be on a high spiritual level. We didn't have to be a tzaddik. Every single person experienced that revelation at the giving of the Torah. And this is why, when relating that the angel of God appeared to Moshe Rabbeinu within the burning bush, the Aramaic Targum uses the word meaning revelation, which means that this vision that Moshe saw, okay, obviously nobody else physically saw it. There was nobody else there to see it, but it means that this vision that Moshe saw has a message for all of us. We all have that revelation. The inner meaning of this prophecy that God is speaking to Moshe applies to everybody. That's why the word revelation is used here. The same way that the Torah applies to everybody. Same that revelation is being used means that everybody can experience it. So the word revelation is being used here means that this example of prophecy, this first prophecy that Hashem is giving to Moshe, applies for every single Jew and the lessons that it contains. So first, the Alter Rebbe establishes that fact, the fact that this prophecy is a revelation for everyone to understand and apply. It applies to everyone. Then he's going to unpack the lessons of the revelation, all the details of the pasuk explaining the burning bush and not being consumed, and the fact that it's a thorn bush and so on. But first, he has to establish the fundamental premise that this is not just information for Moshe; it's information for every single Jew. So that's what he does first. He's like established the playing field, so to speak. Okay, are we getting it? Any questions before we go into the details? Okay, we'll go on. So that revelation took place in a blazing fire, right? That's the verse, says it's a blazing fire. Rashi comments, in a flame of fire in the heart of the fire, right? We just learned that, Rashi. In the Holy Tongue, the spelling of the latter phrase, Belabas Eish, recalls the word lave, meaning heart. He's explaining Rashi. Where does God's emissary reveal himself? Right, this angel is revealing himself in the heart of the fire. What does that mean? The heart of the fire is the innermost aspects of the fire. That's like a parable, that's like an analogy. What's the analog? This signifies man's innermost kavana in his service of God, his innermost intention in his service of God. The earnest and artless exuberance that is alluded to in the verse in Shir Hashirim that says its coals are coals of fire and intense blaze. So now we're using this experience of Moshe and the prophecy as a parable for man's service of God, or woman's service of God, right? For people's service of God. That the fire is blazing. There's a blazing fire. The revelation happens in the heart of the blazing fire, and that means that a person's innermost service of Hashem is like this burning fire. And where is the heart of the fire to be found? Right, the angels appearing in the heart of the fire. Where is this heart of the fire? What's it inside of? In a lowly bush. Rashi notes, and not in some other tree. In the spirit of God's assurance, I'm with him in distress. Right? This is a low thorn bush, low to the ground, and it doesn't have any fruit. It just has thorns. It's not like a beautiful, tall, sturdy, lush tree. It's a thorn bush that's very low to the ground. That's where this fire is happening. Because, as we read in the Rashi, Imay anechi b'tzara, I'm with him in distress. So the term tsara, which means distress, we're going to unpack that word and what its root is. The word for distress, tsara, in that verse, I'm with him in distress, echoes the word tsar, narrow. The shoresh, the root of the word tsara is tsar, narrow. One of the reasons for that, as an aside, it's not what the Alter Rebbe is going to be exactly talking about now. Is going to give a more like esoteric explanation, but when a person, it says that when a person is in distress, they feel squeezed, they feel like narrow, they can't take a deep breath, right? They feel like very constricted. So the word for constriction and the word for tsaris, for distress, shares a root. So the word for distress echoes the word tsar, narrow, and hence alludes to this world, meaning this world is a world of constraints. So it says, I'm with him in distress. I'm with him in this world, in this experience of this walk on earth, which is constrained, right? Because there's physical constraints for most of us in this physical lifetime. We have some limitations that we have to deal with. In the higher spiritual worlds, the divine light is diffused far and wide, right? There's no physical limitations. So it's just there's lots of expanse. This world, by contrast, is described as narrow because here the divine light is restricted to the finite parameters of the laws of nature. And the underlying this restriction, the divine intent, is that by means of avodah and studying Torah and performing mitzvahs, this distress, this tzara, should be transformed. Listen to this, this is really beautiful. Should be transformed into a source of light, Sohar, which is the same letters but transposed, that illuminates the world with the light of Torah and mitzvahs. So I'm going to just review that for a minute. But right, we have this idea that there's a verse that says, I am with him in tzara. Imay anechi b'tzara, I'm with him in tzara. Hashem is saying, he's in a low thorn bush to show that he's with us in our constraints, in our tzara, in our distress. Distress shares a root with the word tsar, which means constraints, narrow, constricted. Because when we are in distress, we feel constricted. And what's the ultimate constriction is this world. This physical world has constraints and we're constricted. Our body's constricting our soul, physicality is constricting godliness, right? There's not this expansive feeling of connection and understanding of godliness and like this expansive revelation of Hashem in this physical world. We're trying to find it and connect to it. It's available, but it's not out in the open, expansive, right? It's constricted and hidden. So it says that Hashem is with us in this constriction, and because of that, when we learn Torah and we do mitzvahs, we transform this constriction of the physical world, which is tsara, constriction, distress, into tsohar. It's the same letters, if you could see, it's the same Hebrew letters, just we're switching the resh and the hey, and now we read the word as tsohar. We take this physical world of the constrictions with God being there with us, and we're able to transform the tsara to tsohar. We're able to transform the constriction to a source of illumination. We transform it. Similar, if you remember when we were learning the Maimer Basi Lagani, right? That we take the sheker of the world and we make it into a keresh, into a beam, and into a kesher, into a connection to God, right? We take the lie of the world and we make it into a beam of the Mishkan and a connection to Hashem, right? By overcoming our folly and so on. Remember that? So this is like this kind of idea that we're taking the raw materials of the tzara and we're making it into a source of illumination. How do we do that? Because Hashem is with us in that tzara. And since he's with us in that tzara, how is Hashem with us? When we learn Torah, we do mitzvahs, we connect to that. And then we can transform this stress, could be transformed into a source of light. That by itself is a profound teaching, right? But there's more to come.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Does it go the reverse? Can
Yeah.
you in what you do, reconstrict it?
I mean, like if a person makes a mistake or something?
Well, whatever, it could, not just a mistake, but you know, in other words, once the spiritual light is found in the world,
Yeah.
and it's revealed, can we, do we also have the power of doing something, whatever it might be, where it would go the reverse, where it becomes restricted again?
Like, could we mess it up?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, here's the thing. We don't like to talk about those things.
Okay.
But okay, so I
it.
want to answer in two ways. I want to answer two levels, okay? So like level number one, yes, of course, that's what happens. That's what we talk about, the 7 sins that got, right, in Maimer Bastilagani, that got receded to the higher levels, and we had to like yank him back down. Not physically and not literally, because he's always every place, but like that revelation, that, right? And it says that, you know, a person, the Navi talks about how a person's sins basically act as a cloud between them and Hashem. So if you imagine, like there's a parable that the Navi gives, if a person imagines, like, I don't know, if I'm sure everybody here has been on a plane at some point in time. So even if it hasn't been in the last few months, but imagine, you know, you're like taking off on the plane in Chicago and it's a cloudy, miserable weather, right? It's like overcast and cold, and maybe it's even a little rainy. And then what happens as you start going up in the plane, and you go through that cloud cover, and on the other side of the cloud cover, the sun is shining, it's a beautiful day, and you look down and you see this cloud cover, you can't even see the ground anymore because the cloud cover is so thick, right? So when you're on the ground, you say it's a cloudy day. It's not really a cloudy day. The sun is shining. The sun is shining just as brightly as it ever shines. It's that the clouds are acting as a buffer between the sunshine and the ground because they're so thick. So the Navi describes a person's sins basically as like a cloud cover, that, you know, there's thin clouds, thicker clouds. There could be many, many, many thin clouds that act as a thick cloud, right? That it can help us not be able to experience God's light as effectively because it's like clouds are in the way. So we have to like clear the atmosphere. You know, we have to get rid of the clouds. So there's different ways of getting rid of the clouds, right? Learning Torah, doing mitzvahs. There's different, doing tshuva, right? There's different ways of clearing the clouds. So all of our actions have a equal and opposite reaction, whatever that term is in physics, right? Like there's like real, you know, so on one level, yes, that's, you know, that's what happens. On another sort of deeper level, we can, you know, God has a plan for the world. So we can't mess up his plan by our poor choices. He's gonna, you know, it's like GPS is recalculating, you know, like you're still gonna get where you're going. You might have that little detour, might take a little longer. You might have a bumpy road instead of a smooth road because you made a wrong turn. So now GPS has to take you through, you know, something, a construction site that it wouldn't have taken you through otherwise. But like, we're gonna get there because this is God's world and his plan is gonna unfold and we can't really mess it up. But we have a choice to sort of be partners with God in creation and further along in a smooth path as much as we can, or, you know, have a little detours along the way.
Okay.
Aya,
Yeah,
could I ask a quick word question?
yeah.
Sora is mamish, it's literally Saurus. Saurus comes years later through common usage?
Yes.
Source is trouble really, is that Yiddish or Hebrew, source?
It's probably a Yiddishized Hebrew.
Sort of a.
Yeah, it's the same word. Yes, that's exactly the same word.
So it's constraint, the
Yes,
equivalent of the core of trouble.
yes,
It's astonishing. It's amazing, isn't it?
it's beautiful.
Yeah. Yes.
There's not, right, that's exactly what it is. In Hebrew, the concepts in Hebrew are reflective of their source and creation. That's why Hebrew is called the Holy Tongue, right? God created the world with by speaking the Hebrew language. So everything's source is source. Every physical object and every concept is sourced in its Hebrew root. So we unpack and understand concepts by looking at their Hebrew terms, right? That's exactly right. Saris comes from the word sar, which means constraints. What person feels when they have difficulties and they're in distress, they feel constrained. That's really the root of their issue, right? They feel stuck.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, well, that's the cause of the cloud of misery, clearly. But it's interesting. I mean, is sore also a derivative from that? And I don't know, because that's anglicized but it's just a fascinating core of the equivalent of how hard it is to see the cause of trouble. That's the issue, right? Always, right? Because the attempts to change the condition of being in Saurus, why that road is so difficult.
Right. So what we want to do is we want to remind ourselves that from Tsara to Tsohar, which means this illuminating light, is just switching things, it's the same things and just switch them around, switch the order, right? Which the idea is that from that Tsara, we can create this majestic light. We have to like transform it.
There is no light without darkness.
Yeah, there's certainly stronger light after darkness.
Interesting, fascinating, astonishing. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, they're very beautiful ideas. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay. So let's continue. So now we have to get to the thorn bush part, right? We talked about the tsara part, and now I'm going to explain a little bit more about the thorn bush. So man is likened to the tree of the field, right? We have a pasuk in Chumash, Adami Eitz Hasada, that man is like the tree of the field. There are fruit-bearing trees, which, as Rabbi Yochanan teaches, represent Talmidei Chachamim, the Torah scholars, because they're bearing fruit, right? They're teaching others learning, they go on to teach others learning, like fruit-bearing trees produce fruit that produce more trees and so on. And then there is the sneh, the barren bush, right? That is the tree that Hashem chose to reveal himself in Moshe, to Moshe, is this barren bush called a sneh. In fact, Har Sinai, so going back to what Bonnie was saying about roots and words, we got the term Har Sinai. It was called Har Sinai because that's where the sneh was. It's the same word. That's where the bush was, to remind us that Hashem appeared to Moshe in this lowly bush, and Har Sinai was one of the lowest mountains, right? This idea. So Hashem chooses to reveal himself in this sneh, in the barren bush. That is where the blazing fire is found. The fire is found in this low to the ground thorn bush. The Talmidei Chachamim are fiery because the Torah is likened to fire. However, of their fire, it cannot be said that it is not consumed, right? We're saying that the sneh had a fire in it and it was burning, but the sneh, this thorn bush, was not being consumed. That's a very huge part of this vision of Moshe. That's what made him look, right? What's going on over here in the pasuk? It's called Mara Hagadol, this great sight of this bush that is ablaze, but it's not being consumed. So that's astonishing to have a bush ablaze and not being consumed. That's what Moshe went over there to see what was going on. The Talmidei Chachamim, these scholars are ablaze. They're the fruit trees that are ablaze, but it cannot be said that their tree is not being consumed, because they quiet their fiery fervor by producing innovative Torah teachings. In other words, they have a fire for Hashem and his Torah, but they satiate that fire with their Torah learning. They quench their thirst for God with their Torah learning. This is not the case with the unlettered folk represented by the sneh, this thorn bush, because the blazing fire is their heart. True, they do not know the meaning, right? Because it says it's in the heart of the heart of the flame. True, they do not know the meaning of the words they are reading. Nevertheless, because their earnest, unsophisticated davening and tehillim spring from simple faith, the blazing fire within them is not consumed. It is never quieted, and they constantly experience an intense yearning for godliness and the Torah and the mitzvahs. Specifically because they're not learned, they continue to feel this intense learning. They can't satiate their fiery desire for Hashem with their Torah understanding, because they don't have a deep level of Torah understanding. Whereas the scholars can feel satisfied with their desire to connect to God through their Torah learning. A simple person who doesn't even understand the translation of the words they're saying for davening, their desire, that fire that's burning inside of them, is never satiated. It doesn't ever finish, because they can never completely quench that flame. Do we get that? It's going to be explained again more, but do we see that? It's such a strong desire to connect to God that can never be satisfied, because they feel like they never reach their goal. Now, we're going to see, nobody ever reaches their goal, but a person who's a Talmid Chacham might think that they reach their goal. Nobody ever could reach their goal, because God is infinite. There's always more to do, more to learn, more to connect, a deeper level, right? You can't ever completely reach, completion in our relationship with God. But a person might be fooled into thinking that they can if they have a lot of Torah knowledge. They could be like, well, I got this. I got this relationship with God. I have all this Torah learning. I know this. I got this. But it's not true. It's an illusion, right? But the people who are the sneh, they don't have such illusions. They don't kid themselves into thinking that they've mastered everything, because they can't even translate the davening. They can't even translate the tehillim. They know they know very clearly that there's a lot more that they need to do. And because of that, they have this constant yearning. And that is described by the fire constantly burning in the thorn bush, and it's never being it's not consuming the thorn bush. So what would happen if it consumed the thorn bush? Then the fire would go out, right? Have no more fuel. But fire, when it consumes its fuel, it just goes out. So the fact that the fire is not going out is because it's not consuming the sneh. It's not consuming the sneh because the sneh doesn't ever feel satisfied with its relationship with Hashem. So it's constantly fueling the fire. It's never being consumed. Whereas a Torah scholar could make the mistake of thinking like, I got this. So like they, so to speak, were consumed by their fire, so their fire could go out. Then they have to relight it the next day or whatever it is, right? Do we see that? Having beheld the burning bush, Moshe said, let me now turn aside and look at this remarkable sight. Moshe is like, this is amazing. Let me figure out what is going on over here. Rashi comments, I will turn aside from here and come closer to there. Right? Remember we said the question on the pasuk, what do you mean? If he turns aside, he won't see anything. He's looking at it now. What does it mean? He's turning aside. If he turns aside, he's going in the opposite direction. But no, he's turning aside from where he is standing right now to come closer. So this becomes a very deep lesson in Avodas Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu now comprehended the heavenly sight. He had been shown how ordinary folk possess a lofty quality in which they are superior to the Torah scholars. Now that he had been shown that the blazing fire is to be found only in the humble bush, it's not like, okay, also the humble bush has this. No, it's only the humble bush that has this. He reached the rung of tshuva. Moshe himself said to himself, I need to do tshuva. So this sight of the burning bush, burning and not being consumed, inspired Moshe to doing tshuva. What does that mean? However, Moshe Rabbeinu was a consummate tzaddik, right? He was a complete tzaddik. He never sinned. And for a person at this level, tshuva is utterly different from ordinary tshuva, right? He's not doing tshuva that he ate a cheeseburger, or he's not doing tshuva that he, whatever, right? Fill in the blank of what somebody might have to do tshuva about, right? That's not the tshuva that a tzaddik has to do. In fact, the Torah relates that when he was born, his mother saw him, that he was good, that the entire house was suffused with light. Meaning, from the time he was born, he was destined to be the Redeemer of the Jewish people, and he was a holy tzaddik. So holy that it says, the pasuk says that when he was born, his mother saw that he was good. And there's two opinions, or there's many more opinions, but there's two main opinions as to what does that mean. One opinion is that the entire house filled with light when he was born, so they understood this is going to be a child that's going to bring light to the world and to the nation. And the other is that he was born with a bris milah. There's a few people throughout history that were born already what's called mahol. They're already born with a bris milah, with a circumcision, and that represents the fact that they are personally extremely refined. So these two things, that the house filled with light and that he was born with a bris, represent that he was going to bring light to the world as a leader. He was going to be a tremendous leader, and that he had a bris, that he himself was an extremely refined individual. So what kind of tshuva did he have to do already? There's nothing that he had to do tshuva for. However, when he saw this, he said that he has to go from his place to go closer to there. What does that mean? For him, tshuva meant he would now turn aside from here, from where he was standing, and come closer to there and go to that bush. This means that one should never be satisfied with his current spiritual rung. Even a tzaddik like Moshe Rabbeinu must engage in this avodah to turn aside from here and come closer to there. This is the dynamic of tshuva. What does tshuva mean? The definition of tshuva means where I am right now is not where I want to be. I want to be at a closer level to God. So for some people, that might mean they used to eat cheeseburgers. They're not eating cheeseburgers now. For a tzaddik like Moshe, it means he's going to leave his present spiritual status and he's going to learn something new in his spiritual service of Hashem. In this case, what was he learning? He was learning from the simple Jew who has an undying, unquenchable fire in his heart to want to connect to God that he cannot quench with his Torah learning or his understanding of the davening, because he doesn't have it. And Moshe is going to learn from that simple Jew that is how he has to serve Hashem. So we have the simple Jew being the inspiration, and we have the tzaddik doing tshuva, which are, as we're going to see, I guess next class, those were the two objections that the scholars had to the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, and how the Alter Rebbe is explaining the philosophical and spiritual underpinnings. Where did the Baal Shem didn't like make this up someplace. Where did the Baal Shem Tov learn that these two things are fundamentals in our service of Hashem? He learned it from the very first time that God spoke to Moshe. And we in general, we say the first, I think we learned it in this class, I'm not sure. The first yichidus that a chassid would go to a Rebbe would be like the Rebbe would set him on his path of Aveda. The first prophecy that God would give a prophet is seen to be the fundamental prophecy. Moshe's first nevuah is not just a personal nevuah, as we established here, right? As Alter Rebbe established here. Moshe's first nevuah is a nevuah that Hashem revealed for everyone. This is a fundamental teaching in Torah. These 2 points, Moshe understood them. Baal Shem Tov's teaching them to us now. And that becomes the response of the Alter Rebbe to these people who are questioning Baal Shem Tov's teaching. In the next sections, the previous Rebbe is going to explain, how it played out in that conversation in Minsk, in that disputation. But this is like the teaching of Alter Rebbe, that he says this is what the Baal Shem Tov is basing his two fundamentals that you have problems on. This is what he's basing it on. So, okay, I see there's a question. I'm going to say we're gonna stop here, like in the inside learning, and then we'll have to continue next time. But if you have a question, Bubby, yes. Bubby, you have a question?
In a very simplistic way, is this the objection that those who are not Hasidim, so we'll call them misnagdim because I don't know what else to use, is this their objection to Hasidus, the fact that we're all Balchuvas? In other words, we all have to keep our learning. I somehow thought I heard that in what you were saying, but maybe not. Can you clarify?
This is the objection that the Misnagdim had in that generation. These 2 points. These are 2 points. One is that Baal Shem Tov elevated the simple folk and told his great scholars, students, that they have something to learn from the simple folk. And he sent his scholars to go learn things from simple folk. And 2, that even a tzaddik, even a Talmid Chacham has to do tshuva. These were the 2 problems that they had with the Baal Shem Tov's teachings. So I don't know, today, I'm not even sure that people who are against Chassidus, first of all, it's not as prevalent as it was then. I think the teachings of Chassidus have proved themselves over the years. But there could still be people who have objections to these 2 ideas. I'm not sure, but these were the two main objections in that time with Alter Rebbe, and this is how he answered it. We didn't unpack yet, like the explanation of, he just taught this idea, and now the explanation of it is going to be in the next few pages, but this is the source for where the Baal Shem Tov learns this from, and basically it's Torah, it's not, so he didn't make, so that's what, yes, these are the objections that they had at that time, and I'm sure that some form or another of people who might have objections like that today is some iteration of these 2 ideas.
I'm seeing more and more in my community, which is a very mixed community, more and more learning of Tanya, which makes me feel that there is now an understanding by those who did not understand. They're coming to more and more to see the value of Hasidus. Would you respond to that? Do you see that?
Yeah, for sure, there's more and more acceptance and understanding. So I'm saying, like, over these few centuries, I think that people have, Hasidus has proven itself, and people are much more open to learning Hasidus, and sometimes they don't even know that they're learning Hasidus, but it's definitely, that's the whole prophecy that the Baal Shem Tov had with Mashiach, right? That his wellsprings have to spread forth. That's what we've been trying to do since that prophecy over 200 years ago, is to spread the teachings of Hasidus. So yes, for sure, it's spreading, and more people are learning, and hopefully changing attitudes and refining belief systems as it goes along.
I also hear in my shiurim that I go to, which is mostly non-Hasidic teachings, different people every week. Lately, last 5, 6, 7 years, more about Mashiach that I was not hearing, say 10 years ago. So that's very heartwarming. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, it is 100%. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question. It's still bothering me from a couple classes ago. Page 13, it was saying how, I forgot who it was, had to go, when he wanted to visit the Rebbe, he had to study a lot. Like, it wasn't, that's why I was asking, were they exclusive? Because it just seems like he had to go through so much just to go see the Rebbe. Am I misunderstanding something?
Well, I mean, it's like anytime a person wants to have a deeper experience of something or a respectful experience of something, there's protocol that is appropriate to follow, right? So, I mean, if you can compare it, if somebody was going to have an audience with some sort of official, a government official, there's protocol that has to follow, and maybe they have to dress a certain way, and maybe they need to learn certain things about the royal family, or I don't know, some kind of narishkeit, I don't know if it's narishkeit, but some kind of something that they have to learn to make themselves in an appropriate mindset to have that kind of audience. So Hasidim in general talks about how Hasidim in general would always prepare before a yechidus with any rebbe. It talks about some Hasidim would prepare for 7 years before they would go into a yechidus with the rebbe, because they didn't feel it was respectful otherwise. They wanted to make themselves a vessel. We learned this idea from the idea of, let's say, for Shabbos, right? Somebody who a person can't show up to Shabbos and expect to have a Shabbostic day, because you can't cook on Shabbos, you can't turn on and off lights on Shabbos. Like, a person has to prepare before Shabbos in order to experience Shabbos. We have this whole idea in general in Torah that the preparation for something is as important as the thing itself if the person wants to be able to experience it fully, right? A woman going to the mikveh, she can't just show up at the mikveh and immerse. There's a whole week of preparation before she goes to the mikveh. So that concept also applies on a spiritual level. Before a chassid would go to a rebbe, they would prepare themselves. They didn't feel it was respectful to just show up and expect the rebbe to give them time without any kind of fertilization of themselves, plowing and sowing and tilling of soil. Our rebbe in this generation really made himself accessible in ways that was completely remarkable. Standing in line, people from all over the world, Jewish, not Jewish, could just come and talk to him whenever they wanted to. It was a remarkable, remarkable thing. So we were quite spoiled. But for example, when we go to the Ayil, which, I'm hoping maybe this spring we'll be able to take a women's trip to the Ayil, I encourage women to come to a class beforehand, to learn about what it means. It makes it it makes the person a larger, more fertile receptacle for the experience. So for sure, a yeshiva bacher who his job is to learn Torah, they would tell them, look, you want to go to the rebbe? Great, learn Torah, prepare yourself. This is how a yeshiva bacher prepares himself. He needs to learn, he needs to make sure that he's in the right mind frame. He's coming in a respectful mindset. He's done his part and not just expected that the rebbe's going to hand on a silver platter, whatever he's looking for, right? It's like, where's your skin in this game? Like, you also need to put yourself into something, right? It's not about passivity, it's about respect, preparation, like that. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. That clarifies.
Okay, sure. Okay. Well, have a good week, everybody.
Thank you, Chaya. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Thank
sure.
you.
Thank you, Chaya.
Okay.
Chaya, how is your mother?
Okay, Baruch Hashem.